hello, and welcome to Perspectives with Black Men. We are excited to be here today with you to talk about allies and allyship and having conversations with allies. This is a very important discussion. So we know Perspectives with Black Men has been in a 10-part series. We are on part 9, discussing race and racism in America from the perspective of Black men. And today is a very special episode. We're actually having conversations with allies. So this may be the only episode that we do that we have non-Black men on. And so I'm really excited to have our guests. We have 5 wonderful guests here today, some of my good friends, to have conversations about allyship and what that means. And so I'm really excited to first welcome on one of my good friends from college, Kat Perot, who also lives right here in Akron as well. So we're really proud to have her here. And so thank you for being here with us. I met you in college and you were joining a sorority when I met you. And you ended up, I believe, being president of that sorority and then president of Panhill, I believe, if I remember correctly. You correct me if I'm wrong. You have to unmute though. Yeah, we can't hear you.
Sorry.
Yes. So if my memory served me well, as we discovered earlier, we're not as 18, 19 anymore.
Yeah, well, we did meet in college at Eastern Michigan University. So I'm from Northeast Ohio. I grew up in Cuyahoga Falls, and I attended Eastern Michigan from 2002 to 2006. And I did join Alpha Zeta Delta while I was there. I was never president of AZD, but I was Panhill president. After college, I was not an education major, but I joined Teach for America and moved to the Mississippi Delta. So I spent 4 years in rural Mississippi before then moving on to a military base in Kentucky, close to a military base in Tennessee, and then moved back to Ohio and now live in Akron. I moved back in 2015 and I'm an elementary school principal. So I've taught in many places and earned my master's degree in educational leadership from Bethel College in Tennessee.
Yes. I remember so vividly how excited you were to teach in the Mississippi Delta.
It was everything. Yeah.
Really excited. And, I'm sure you had a really great experience there. And we probably won't talk about it on the show, but I thought that was pretty dope of you to do. And I still just remember how excited you were to be going to the Mississippi Delta, which I still have never been. So next we have joining the show is another good friend of mine, Dr. MarTeze Hammonds. I think you're in Dallas now, right? You've been moving all over the place. I'm trying to keep up with you, brother. But I believe you're in Dallas now, was in Arkansas and some other places as well. Really good friend of mine. He has a doctorate in educational leadership. And so I just wanted to invite him because he and I have done trainings together, and he does trainings on racism and race and how to have those culturally competent discussions and those hard discussions and how to lead through difficulty. So welcome, Dr. Hammonds.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. As I always tell folks, I'm hyena happy and peacock proud to be in this space today. I am from Murray, Kentucky, not too far probably from that where Catherine was living for a little bit. And I went to Murray State University, where I not only pledged the wonderful Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Zeta Omicron chapter key number 345. However, I did earn a theater degree, and after I earned my theater degree, I earned a bachelor's and a master's in organizational communication, and then stayed there a little while longer and earned a second master's in human development leadership, and then went on to University of Arkansas, and that's where I got my educational doctorate in higher education administration. Since then, I have been running from college to college administration, and now have settled for right now in corporate America. So I'm at the American Cancer Society as a senior consultant for diversity and inclusion by way of Dallas, Texas. Yeah, so glad to be here. Thanks for the invite, brother.
No problem. Thank you, brother.
Brother Dr. Akbar.
The way you say my name is just always funny to me. So next we have someone else that I've known since college. We have Keith Paul Jason, and he is a great friend, actually. And he's been a great ally in many ways, even when we were on campus and trying to do things. And, some people, I don't know who all know this, but you were the graduate assistant for the Student Multicultural Center back in undergrad. And, well, you were in grad school. I was in undergrad. And you provided us some great advice and leadership. And that was a time when the university has really, I think, defunded diversity. So there was no coordinator or anything, if I remember correctly, and you were the person. So thank you for all of that. And yeah, Keith Paul Jason, everybody.
Hey, thank you for having me this evening. So you're absolutely right, Dr. Akbar. I was a graduate assistant functioning as a coordinator at the time. There was a time of about 4 or so years where Eastern Michigan University did not have a program coordinator for the Center for Multicultural Affairs. It was actually probably longer than that now that I think about it. So I grew up in Freeport, Illinois, proud to be a pretzel. It is the only, well, there's actually 2 pretzel mascots in the entire country for high schools. And so both of them reside in Illinois, but I believe we were first. But what I will say is this, I went to Eastern Michigan University, was there from 99 to 05 for undergrad, grad, met Dr. Akbar there. And he tells the story of how Judy Sturgis Hill made sure that we met. And while I don't remember this particular instance, he tells the story much better than I remember it, that's for sure. So I'm just really glad to be here this evening to have the opportunity to talk about this idea of being an ally, because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot more lately. Because if you're not careful, you can get caught up in doing the work so much that you don't always think about what the work actually means and how it means when you show up to do it, or what it means when you show up to do it. So I'm looking forward to talking with everybody this evening.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, so we did meet my freshman year. The late, great Judy Sturgis Hill, who was a faculty member. She was faculty in residence in the FYC our freshman year, Kat. And she just, I was minding my business, coming from the eateries, trying to get my food and go upstairs to my room. And she said, no, you have to come in the SSO. The SSO was the Student Success Office in the FYC, the First Year Experience Center. And Keith was talking about overcoming different difficulties and all of that, and sitting on the couch. And I just remember, this is the last thing I'll say. I just remember us being there for like 3 hours, but me like not wanting to leave. So really, really powerful information that he was bringing. That was my first introduction to Keith there, and been following him ever since. And I actually watched your episode of Saturday Stories where your teacher talked about the meaning of the pretzel. So I have a whole new thought process on that, which I would have never thought I would even be talking about pretzels as a mascot. So next we have one of my other friends. I met her a few months ago, actually like the day or two after George Floyd was murdered. And we have a mutual friend, so Hanna Rose, and was having a conversation about what it meant and why that murder specifically was so jarring. And so Hanna, thank you for joining us. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too, and thank you for letting me join and be a part of this discussion. As the doctor said, my name is Hanna. I'm an artist and a creative. I'm from Ypsilanti, Michigan. Um, I've always been around diversity and mainly and especially the Black community. They embraced me when I was a young teenager, and I embraced them back, and there's been no turning back from it. I immersed and indulged myself in the culture and from their perspective, and trying to understand and appreciate who they were as a community, as people. Um, so like I said, there was no turning back. So I've always tried to use my voice and my strong will to aid in any way that I can. And yeah, it's just all love.
Yes, thank you very much. We definitely, I know I appreciate your voice and your perspective. Um, and so, last but not least, we have another good friend of mine. We grew up in the same neighborhood, Dr. Shetina Jones. Please welcome us. Welcome to the show. 48204 is in the building.
Absolutely.
All right. So Shetina is also her doctorate. She finished earlier this year, I believe. Right? I don't know. Time is going by, but I'm really, really proud of her. Again, we grew up in the same neighborhood, so we know that struggle. And we didn't have doctors in our neighborhood. We didn't have those examples, and so we both went to college together as well, and lived in the first year center together. And she helped me as when I was working in hall government. And so I won't tell the story because she will probably. And she always mocks me for my book bag. But welcome, Dr. Jones. Please don't tell that story though.
Hey, friend. Hey, everybody. I'm not going to tell the book backstory because that's our thing. So NJ and I have been friends for a very, very, very long time. I just actually find it so odd that we didn't meet in high school, since we did some of the same things in high school. But as NJ has shared, I am the good Dr. Shetina M. Jones. I go by Dr. J if you my friends. So I am among friends. So you can definitely call me Dr. J. I did my undergraduate and my master's degree at Eastern Michigan University, where I studied elementary education and higher education student affairs and community college leadership. I went on to complete my doctorate degree at Indiana State University in the Black College of Education, where I studied historically Black colleges and universities, and I did a research study on high achieving Black women at HBCUs. So I have gone from Michigan and being in Michigan my whole life to living in Indiana, to living in Texas, and now we're back in the great state of Ohio. So I have always had an interesting path, if you will. It's been different. And I always credit my success to being at Eastern Michigan University. It's where I did so many great things. I also am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, where I joined at Eastern Michigan University, and that too has created a path for me. So I think that tonight's topic is very fitting for what's happening in this country. And I think that for you, Dr. Akbar, this is a great way to have some much needed conversations to help our world pivot.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing that. And that brings me back to why we have this conversation in the first place. Perspectives with Black Men is all about our voices, our experiences, our solutions from the perspectives of Black men. And so one of the things when I was setting up this series on racism, I thought was critically important that we added a conversation with allies and to talk about allies. Because one thing that I know in my studies around race and racism and power and how power works and how oppression works, that you can't overcome power and oppression without having people who are in power, without having people who can fight oppression for you and with you at the table. And so we can't do it alone. As oppressed people, we can't fight oppression by ourselves and make changes because we don't have the power to do it, right? So we need to have some good allies. And so I thought it was important to have this discussion with allies because of that. And so with that being said, I want to just jump right into it. We have a pretty packed show today. We're going to try to get to these questions. And based off the way Facebook is set up right now, it looks like we have quite a bit of people watching. So we might get a lot of questions tonight. So with that being said, I want to jump right in. And can you just start off? We're going to start with Kat. Just talk to me and talk to us about when did you know racism was a thing? And next we'll have Dr. Hammonds, Keith, Hanna, and then Dr. Jones following Hanna.
Thank you. I'm truly so humbled to be with this panel of individuals, and thinking about when I knew race was a thing. The community where I grew up in is predominantly white, predominantly middle class, upper middle class. And so I didn't have neighbors that looked different than me. My schoolmates in elementary school looked pretty similar to me and most of the way through. And so my view of race really came from the media. And so what I saw on TV and what I saw in movies. And when I think then, and I take it to the sense of, or the question of when did I know racism was a thing? I feel really silly with this answer, but when I saw the movie Higher Learning was probably the first time I knew that there was this thing where it wasn't all great. And no part of my life had told me otherwise, but seeing it portrayed that way, I think was really impactful to me in how I viewed the world around me, and that I knew kind of the world around me was a facade.
Good. For me, when did I would say that I was introduced to race early in life. Growing up in the projects, growing up in the quote unquote hood of Murray, Kentucky, there was no secret that you were a different color when everyone looked like you, and there was very few folks who were actually of a different race that lived in the hood, and we didn't see them that much as a different color because they lived in the same struggle as we. However, we did notice that they were different, right? Because we gave them specific nicknames, right? Like white chocolate. So, early on, we really knew race. Now, when it comes to racism, I think I would say I was 6 years old and I was in the community theater. I started community theater early at 6, and I was auditioning, quote unquote, for a role. And one of the directors, I'll never forget, told me to my face as a 6-year-old that there are no Black characters. And I was like, but they told us everybody gets a role, right? And she looked at me and she said, there are no Black characters. And that's when I had to have a hard conversation with others and one of my role models to say, okay, well, there's no Black characters, but why can't I be in the show? Why, and then that's when they said, there's this thing called race. There's this thing called people are not gonna be comfortable with you being in a role. 6 years old, folks. That was harsh. That was hard. But yeah, thanks for that question.
All right, so I think I'm up next. I'm not sure. Okay, so recognize race. Early on in life, Freeport is much like Ypsilanti in that, yes, it's predominantly white, but there's a whole lot of other people that are there. Black people would be the next biggest group. And that's where I spent a lot of my time. The way the school lines were drawn, I went to Taylor Park. And if you know anything about Taylor Park in Freeport, it is a predominantly Black neighborhood. And so that's where I went to kindergarten, and then got taken to another school because they said they thought that I was advanced intellectually. So they sent me to a different program and bused me to a different school. And so I think it was there that I started to realize that there were some differences in this world, and some things that were not lining up equally.
Okay, so I have a question. I'm sorry. I can't hear Keith. Are you still talking?
No, I'm done.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I'm working on talking less.
Okay. I was like, was that it? All right, Hannah. I'm sorry.
No worries. I was wondering the same thing. Okay, so I mean, race, I first realized, race from a young age. Like I said, I grew up in Ypsilanti, so, you know, especially when it comes to Black people, like I've been around them my whole life. Um, I saw the difference in, the physical differences, but that was it. I want to say when I realized that there was, racism, that was when I went to high school. Um, and, they had found out that I was actively involved in the Black community. And the school that I went to was predominantly white. It was school of choice. So my parents sent me there rather than any of the community schools in Ypsilanti. So that's where my eyes were opened to the reality that racism did not end when the North won the Civil War.
So I realized, so I always recognize race, right? So I probably should have said this. I came up through Detroit public school systems, which I'm super and uberly proud of. But essentially, I knew that being in the schools that I was in, that our schools were predominantly Black, and we oftentimes only had one or two non-Black folks in our school. So I knew that other people existed. When I realized that racism was a thing, was probably my time in this organization called FCCLA. Actually, at that time it was called Future Homeworkers of America, FHA Hero. And anybody knows me, this organization going from seventh grade on up really helped me flourish as an individual. And I remember we went to a retreat, and I somehow became a state officer in the organization. And it's very much the space is occupied by white folks, but it's an open space, but it's definitely occupied by white folks. So I remember going up to the Upper Peninsula, and for those who are not in Michigan, the Upper Peninsula is its own kind of utopia, if you will. And I remember being somebody told me that there was another Black family in the town, but it was me and another Black family. And I just remember that when I went into this restaurant, we all went out to eat because we did dinner together, we did all these things together. And I just remember like people staring at me, and just, it was a different experience. And my advisors did their absolute best to protect me. So there was this guy that kept trying to talk to me, and I can't even tell you what he wanted to talk to me about, but like I just remembered that like my advisors felt uncomfortable, and they was like, we have to go. And from there I was like, I don't really know what that's all about. And I kind of sort of broke it down with my mom. And I think I was in 10th or 11th grade, and my mom just broke it down to me and said to me that they probably did that because they probably knew what was going to happen next. So they tried to shield me from something. And I really, really value those individuals, because when you think about allyship, I don't know what they were thinking at that time, but it was definitely a much, much, much different experience for me. And that's when I kind of realized what like racism was a thing, regardless of my kind of experiences with people and my I wouldn't even say experiences, my relationships with people.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. You know, I tell people one of my first times I realized racism was a thing was when I was very young, and I think it was 1992. I was in second grade, I think, and on the TV, and maybe it was later than this, but this is just I was young, and there was a TV where police officers were beating a black man, and later, you know, I realized that was Rodney King, and just knowing how upset like my parents were at that, just seeing that, and just the conversation that sparked, and you saw on the TV, you saw a division, a visible like racial division between people who were black, who were really talking outwardly about how wrong that was, and whereas there were white people saying that the police were justified. That was like one of my most visible moments when I realized racism was a thing. And just hearing those conversations kind of made it more apparent. And so I really appreciate everyone sharing their stories there, and that. But let's talk about the main topic of the day. Let's throw it on the table. You know, allyship. You know, so what is the role of an ally? I'm gonna go in the same order. So, Kat.
Yeah. So, kind of reflecting on the answers evolves, I think, my response a little bit about what is the role of an ally. And I think about some of the things that were mentioned, thinking about Rodney King, or like the OJ trial triggered in my head for that. Those were things I really didn't know about as a child. And so I think there was a perspective in raising me to shield me from things that were ugly in the world that were happening to people. And so as I've tried to reconcile that or dig into that in my life, really since Eastern, seeing the role of an ally is kind of the opposite of that, of saying this is happening and pretending that it's not is unacceptable. And ignoring that is unacceptable. Allies need to be advocates, but allies need to listen. There are plenty of times I need to shut up and I need to hear the voices around me, and I need to just be quiet. I need to check on friends and say, how are you? What do you need from me? Or ask when I need help. But more than that, it's nobody else's responsibility than my own to dig in and do the work. So when I see something and read a post that doesn't quite make sense, so the tearing down of the statue of Francis Scott Key, well, I didn't know why that was necessary, but I also knew that people being upset about that didn't jive well either. And so I needed to do that work. It was nobody else's responsibility to teach me. But once I learned it, I needed to say, here's why it was appropriate to say that statue, that monument can no longer stand. And so there's just this cycle of being an ally that's listening, speaking up, quieting down and hearing what's happening and observing and learning more and speaking back up. And so I guess that's how I view allyship for me is cyclical. And that also as an educator, ensuring that every child receives access to an excellent education is the most profound piece of allyship I can put forth in my life.
Thank you. I truly look at the role of an ally by the way in which I frame allyhood or allyship or an ally. For me, especially for this conversation, an ally is someone who is outside of that marginalized group, who do not identify within that marginalized group, but who can come to the assistance, the aid of or aid to someone who doesn't mind doing some of the heavy lifting and work in making an oppressed population that much closer to closing the gap, if you will. And so for me, I look at an ally, remember, it's someone who does not identify in that population, who will step in, roll up their sleeves, and do that hard work. Building off of what Catherine said, most definitely, an ally, the role of an ally is for someone who may, can have a major sense of empathy, to empathize with what some people are going through and what's going on with that population, and then being able to go in and learn of the population, walk with the population, to most definitely try your best to advance that population of people, moving from oppression to somewhat power and privilege, if that ever will exist or come to fruition. So that's what I see ally as. I see, as a Black male myself, I think the role of an ally is for those people who don't mind to really roll up their sleeves and stand in the gap sometimes. And that's hard. Standing in the gap, standing in the trenches, that's hard on behalf of a Black man, especially right now in America. And so, yeah, I'm interested in hearing the rest of the panelists' role.
So as I think about this, one of the realizations that I've come to is that I have spent the majority of my life, at this point in my life, in a very Black world. Like, I've oftentimes been the only white face in the room, a lot of times, right? And I think for a long time, I didn't really think about things from an ally perspective as much as I thought about this is the community that I'm a part of. And so it didn't even really dawn on me like that. But what I will say is that now, when I think about this, I think about the importance of presence, the importance of showing up, the importance of being able to listen, and the importance of being able to be held accountable. I think that there is a temptation to become the super Caucasoid, so to speak. So like you are the super white person who is above racism, like you get it all, you understand it all. And it just doesn't work like that. One of the most important talks that I ever had in my career was when the associate director of financial aid at the time of my first role at Eastern Michigan University pulled me to the side and explained to me why I wouldn't be doing any financial aid presentations. And I thought to myself, now, wait a minute, who are you talking to? Like, I come from a background of performing arts and public speaking and being able to, like, I got this, right? Like, I know how to do this. And, she said to me, now I didn't say all those things to her. I just kind of sat there with a blank look on my face. But she said to me, I know that you're talented in the area of being on stage. But what you need to understand about financial aid is that right now, you only know enough to be dangerous. And when I thought about that, I was upset initially. Like, again, who is she talking? Like, I couldn't see past myself, my perceived strength, the things that I was good at, the things that I thought I knew. And I really had to go back and think about it some more, and have realized that there are a lot of times when I was speaking up, not just in financial aid, but in other places where I really only knew enough to be dangerous. And I'm looking forward to talking about that some more later on.
I think all the answers so far are great. I can especially relate with Keith's experience and perspective. I think, in this case, the role of an ally just kind of goes back to like the definition of an ally, and how I've always seen it, an ally is someone that may not always be active with you and everything, but when it comes time for like war, like they're the ones that come in, they aid, they assist, they make it happen so that you come out victorious, right? Or at least that's the goal for the outcome. And I think for me, with being, a white person with white privileges, and someone who has taken the time and the initiative and the effort to understand the Black community, it's my responsibility to not only be, a voice or an advocate or someone to stand in the gap, but it's for me to also have some discretion about it. So you don't end up being more of a weapon than someone trying to bring understanding to the table. I'm a fighter by nature, so when I see something that's not right, especially speaking to racism, I am like, I'm gonna cut you up, slice you up, and feed you to the dogs. Like, I don't have time for you. But I've had to learn that never to keep quiet, but to learn how to present the information and your understanding and your knowledge and your insight in a way that is not so combative, especially right now, because a lot of people right now are really seeing things. They're starting to see things. So some people, you got to be careful. Other people, they're just not going to want to see it. I've actually encountered that recently. Some people just really don't want to see it, and they want to be comfortable in their thought process and in what they see. And you know what? I could talk to them all day in the nicest, sweetest tone that I have possible in me to do, and they still won't get it. So, those are those people. But I guess I say all that to say, the role of an ally is someone to come in to aid. And like, I think it was Catherine who had said, take the time, the initiative, the effort to learn about, in this case, the Black community and what racism is to them, like that it's still real, it's still, it's still happening, and see their perspective of things with law enforcement to military to education. Like try to get an understanding, because as an ally, that's one of the most important things that we can bring to the table is understanding.
So I think this is a very interesting question for so many reasons. So I'm kind of gonna slightly go into a different direction than where everyone else is going in. I think that allies do the work. For me, it's important before you kind of go out and you get to talking and be like, yeah, I want to be down with the Black people. Let me go ahead and advocate. You have to understand what you're advocating for and what that actually entails. I always recommend folks watch the movie Selma, because there are allies in Selma who literally lost their lives. And I think about some of my ancestors who was doing the civil rights movement and stuff. A lot of people, when they were doing this work, it's not cute, it's not a hashtag, it's not a fad. People were literally getting harmed because they wanted to see something different in this world. And true allyship looks like people who've done the work themselves. You recognize that, here's the thing, you done read a book besides the post-traumatic slave syndrome book, the white fragility book. I need you to understand what critical race theory is. I need you to understand how intersectionality just wasn't something that's cute, and it's not just a name, that it's not a term that we use, but you need to understand how our varying identities intersect. So it's important that, number one, allies do the work. And then I will take this from my good fraternity brother. I don't know if you said it, but I'm gonna repeat it if you said it. But this piece of with allyship, it's not somebody that's your savior for Black folks, because at the end of the day, Black folks been Black folks for as long as we can remember. And on top of us being Black folks and understanding that we understand our plight, but we most definitely need individuals who will fight and who will be able to advocate for us in ways that it's actually helpful and not harmful.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think just the last show I was talking about critical race theory with the lawyers and how it actually came out of legal scholarship. But, you know, and in that, you know, there's one of the major tenets is permanence of race, right? And the critique of liberalism, neoliberalism, which is, you know, the color blindness, I don't see color comments, right? And so we do have a lot of people who, you know, one of the, I just got into a Facebook argument, if you want to call it that, with a white person who wanted to tell me about race and racism and slavery. Now, mind you, I have a whole PhD in this thing, right? And so the person whose comments or page it was on, she basically said, "You're literally sitting here telling this man that he doesn't know what racism is as a white person. You're telling him he's wrong." Okay, great, thank you. And so when we think about allyship, I just want to shift to there. I appreciate, yeah, it really happens, Stacey. So I really appreciate everything that everyone said and thought about allyship. But when you think of what Shetina, you just said that MarTeze actually said before we even logged on, right? About there's this complex that Black people need to be saved. And so there's these white saviors that come in on their white horses to save the poor Black, you know, people. There's this complex out there. So can you just talk to us about that? And specifically, do you believe that allies should exist? Kat? You don't have to answer if you don't want to.
This question is not for me. You know, I have my perspective as a white woman. This question is for the voice to lift the voice of our people of color.
So I'll start. Thank you. And that's a part of allyship, knowing when to be able to step up, step back, knowing when able to actively listen. Folks, when we're talking about allies, we're talking about folks who can actively listen. That means listen as if you must defend what that person is saying. Now that's some good listening, right? And so yes, I do believe that allies should exist and be in the space. I also believe, as my sister already has stated, that an ally it's not something you just pick up a certification by just reading one book, or pick up a licensure, if you will, by creating a hashtag, or wearing Black Lives Matter on your t-shirt, because now we have evolved to allowing everybody to wear Black Lives Matter on a t-shirt. Because remember, it wasn't that way at first. If you wasn't Black, you weren't wearing Black Lives Matter, but that's a whole different situation. And all why I say that is because folks are doing the work. Folks are in the vineyard, folks are working. Folks are asking genuine questions, and folks are being able to articulate via actions and words what it means for this population of Black males in America right now, right? And so we need allies to be able to articulate this in words and actions, because sometimes their people in their communities, that's only who they're listening to, right? So I tell folks all the time, when I use the words of Dr. Mara Cullen, who is a a white, female, lesbian, diversity and inclusion activist scholar. She wrote a book that says 35 dumb things well-intended people say, right? So when I introduce that to my white audiences, when I'm doing diversity and inclusion work, their ears perk up, right? I didn't say it. She said it. She looks like you. She acts like you, right? And so, again, we need allies to not be the savior, to not come and swoop down and make a name for yourself. Did I say that out loud? I'm sorry. To make a name for yourself, but to truly be in the trenches doing this work. I literally just watched Selma yesterday. I kid you not. I watched Selma, I watched Hidden Figures. I was just watching all these movies because I too needed a reminder, right? For when I'm talking about to my allies, I needed that reminder. I needed that reminder to say, hey, I need y'all to be Selma Ally 5. I made it up. It sounded good. I need you to be, right? I need you to be Civil Rights Ally 5. I need you to be Hidden Figures Ally 5. I need you to be Mississippi Burning Ally 5, right? I need you to be, okay? So I need you to be well-versed enough that you're not taking us steps back when you're talking on our behalf or standing in the gap for us, but you're moving the needle that much closer to equity. That's what we don't want equality no more. We don't need sameness. We need equity, right? We need fairness. Too much sameness out there. We need some fairness. So I'm sorry, Dr. J. But yeah, it speaks so much, right? I mean, just with Kat just saying, you know what, let somebody else handle this. That just speaks to her matriculation level already about how to be an ally. Go ahead, Dr. J. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You know what? You over here talking this thing down. I ain't gonna say you preaching because I almost gave you a love offering. But you know what I want to say, because this is perspectives with Black men, right? So I think for me, and I'm going to just be, I am a cisgender heterosexual Black woman, so I understand the points of privilege and where I come from, right? So I want to say that it's important at this time in society to be allies for Black men, because at this point, I wholeheartedly feel like something's not right, because this attack that's on Black men is something that goes beyond the shootings that are happening. Because if you know anything about history, Black men have always been torn from the Black family. Black men have always been targeted. Black men, I mean, when you think about the war on drugs and the school to prison pipeline, Black men have single-handedly gone first. So when you think about the impacts that has had on the Black family, when I think about allyship, I need people to know that that's a thing. And I need people to know and recognize why you have to, when you are in your corporate spaces, why when a Black man is talking, or a Black woman or another minoritized person is talking, that you have the ability to let them talk. Because sometimes we hear ourselves talk so much that we forget that there are other voices in the rooms. So for me, that's why allies exist, and why true allies should exist, because you need to usher in, if you will, the perspectives of other people. And specifically for Black folks, we've been oppressed for many, many years. And unfortunately, some folks sit in that oppression, but some of us do not. So when we think about allyship, understand that diversity and inclusion and equity, they're not buzzwords, but they are things in which we all should live as allies. And true allies understand and recognize that, and understand that it's not a point of shaming. And I think it was the good sister Hanna who said, some people, and I've recognized this from some of my Facebook friends, we don't want to recognize the horrendous history of this country. And some of us have lived it because we come from minoritized spaces. So true allies again, have done the work and recognize this. So when you show up to spaces, when you are teaching our babies, you're not saying that slavery was immigration, because that's what the books are saying. You've done the work to recognize the plight of Black folks, and we also are moving away from Black on Black crime, because we all know that's a myth. So recognizing these things and doing the work and advocating and doing true advocacy work, which starts with you, which then trickles down to how you treat other people.
Yeah, so I think that is amazing, everything that you said, Dr. Jones and Dr. Hammonds. I just want to say that inclusion and equity and ally, they're not nouns, they're actually verbs, right? And so in order for it to be a thing, in order for it to actually truly live out its definitions, you have to actually act. You have to do something. You have to feel it. So I think that it's very important that we definitely talk about that. And before I go to MarTeze, before I go to you real quick, I just want to say something. Not only was that beautiful what you did, Kat, but it just showed, I hope I'm not stepping out of your comfort zone here, but Kat is one of my good friends. We've been having many conversations, right? Especially since George Floyd murder happened, right? And so one of the things that I love about you is that you text me when you noticed that I was having difficulty with just dealing with this. You text me, how do I need to show up for you? Like, you didn't come and try to save me. You didn't come knock on my door and push me out the way and say, look, I'm going to answer all these questions for you. I'm going to be, but you asked. And I think that, as you think about growing as an ally, because you should continuously learn and grow, you have to recognize when it's your time to be in the front, when your time to be in the back, but also just asking the question. When you have a true friendship with someone, it's not going to hurt them to hear you ask, what do you need from me today? Or, do you need me to show up? In what way can I be an ally for you? That's what true friendship is. If Shetina called me and she said something was going on, I probably wouldn't ask her. I would just show up. So I'll be up in Wilberforce, like, let's go. What y'all doing to my girl? But it's just something that when you are true friends with somebody, you don't need this picture of you having to save people. You just want to be there for your friends, right? So MarTeze or Dr.
Really quick, thank you. Really, Tad, thank you. Really quick, I just want to say, and so to answer your question, yes, allies do need to be in this space, and we do need allies to move the needle. So to answer your question, just really quick, yes, and with that, yes, I also want to say thank you, right? Because it's not very often that allies hear that from folks in those communities. So not saying that we don't always say it, but there are times when we don't say it, right? So those allies who are out there, thank you for the work that you do, and we hope that you continue to do that work. And then lastly, that work is give and take. It is give and take. And sometimes, even when you want to be persistent about being an ally, sometimes you backing away just a little bit is actually helping us as well. So if somebody tells you, thank you very much on this one, I need you to just to be in prayer for me, or just to sit on the sidelines, then take heed to that. Take heed to that, because we can talk about this all day tomorrow and tonight and whenever, but most of these people in these marginalized populations have a sense of PTSD because they've been in them for quite some time. And they've experienced the experiences for quite some time. And so if somebody snaps at you, ally, just go into that ally shield, go into that, find that center and that space to know that we love you and we say thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. You basically just gave a synopsis of Dr. Joy DeGrasse book on the post-traumatic slave syndrome. Almost, just you gave him a little bit there, Dr. Hammonds. I want to go to the next question because I think that you all have done a good job so far with this. And this is the last question before we go to audience questions. We have 3 so far. And so I just want you to describe a time, each of you, to describe a time when you had to interrupt racism for Black men as an ally. And Dr. Hammond, since you're the only Black man here besides myself, if you could talk about when you've seen it happen. Kat?
Sure. So when this question came up, I really tried to rack my brain for some profound moment in my life where, my brain is so programmed to go to white savior. And that's a check. And so when I see who's watching and I think about people who might watch this, recognize that and check it in yourself, because that's right. I needed some big moment. When I interrupt racism, most importantly is in my home in front of my children. And so very recently, a family member was at our home and made a disparaging remark about somebody of another race. So made an assumption about the behavior of somebody because they were a Black man. And I said, I disagree with you, but I also need you to know that I won't tolerate that conversation being had in my home. And so we can disagree about that, but I need you to understand that language isn't welcome here. And my oldest stepson said afterwards something to the effect of, "You're not going to change his mind, right? He is set in his ways. He's a much older person." And I said, I don't need to change his mind as much as I need to understand him to understand that's not acceptable in our home, and that there are 4 children listening who need it to be modeled for them that it is not acceptable to speak about people negatively because of the color of their skin. And there is this presumed white space that because all the people in the room or all the people in the setting are white, so therefore we can engage in that conversation safely. No, we cannot. And unless somebody is modeling that for our children, they will never know how to comfortably do that when a friend makes a joke, when a song is on, when somebody says a word that's not acceptable. I know that my children are out in the world experiencing that just as I have. I didn't have anybody necessarily to model that for me. And so interrupting that racism is modeling it for young people in my life.
Thank you. I think for me, I'm just going to stay real basic right now on this one. On this question, I truly believe, and I just want to say again, I recognize the many folks who do not look like me as an African-American male, who has been standing in the gap for quite some time right now. Not just since George Floyd died, because George Floyd wasn't the only person, but most definitely through the years, I have noticed, and I see you, right? I noticed a good collective of people, both celebrities, both, just humans in general, that are white colleagues, but not only our white colleagues, I've also seen some of our Asian colleagues, Asian counterparts, some of our Hispanic counterparts, and what have you, who have stepped up and really have consistently been an ally. And really addressing racism, whether it's on my Facebook page, whether it's in media, and you know what? And it even draws straight through political lines as well. And so I'll just speak to that really quickly, but I am loving to hear these specific examples. Thanks, y'all.
All right, so a lot of times racism from the system perspective, especially in institutions of higher education. In 2000, 6 or 7, Eastern Michigan University was found to have committed at the time the largest Clery Act violation in the history of the Clery Act. We won't get into the details of that right now, but I will say that they were definitely found at fault in that situation. There were a lot of people who were fired, removed from their roles, and the university moved into a new direction, started putting new people in positions, and then had to enforce the Clery Act to a T. What it led to was hundreds of emails, it felt like, that came out where the description was almost always, a Black male who was somewhere between 5'1" and 6'7", anywhere from like 120 to 250 pounds, and fled in an unknown direction. And so after seeing this, I remember being just frustrated beyond belief. And then learning that people were capitalizing on this when they lost their laptop. It was easier to say a Black man robbed me than it was to confess to mom and dad that I lost my laptop. And so people were getting the insurance money to cover this, as opposed to having to own up to what had actually happened. So I sat down and had a conversation with the chief of police. And I said, I need you to start letting people know that a false report is a true crime. Because we cannot keep having Black men walking around this campus feeling like everyone's eyes are on them because they fit this super vivid description that you've placed in an email to the entire campus community. And so there were many things that took place. They never ran with my campaign that a false report was a true crime, because they were afraid that if they said that, people would be afraid to report things. And so at least we were able to start having some conversation about things and helping people understand that, one, we need to get a little bit better information about these kinds of things that are going on. And we need to also be aware of the impact of how adhering to the law can have a disparate impact on the people that it was intended to protect.
Okay, so a situation, experience of interrupting racism. I mean, there's been a few that I've encountered personally. Most recent would probably be on Facebook. Somebody posted I don't think it was a direct quote, but it was something along the lines of, when they were trying to kind of lessen the death of George Floyd with the fact that, he didn't die from, being choked, but from all these other different medical reasons. So I commented on the post and I said, so it's okay to, put your knee on someone's neck and suffocate them, as long as it wasn't actually the suffocation that caused their death. And the person came back with, that's not what I said. And I was just like, well, then you should probably state what you mean when you decide to post about a very sensitive topic. And then it ended up escalating. I actually had called my girlfriend at the time. I was like, girl, you need to get your friend because he's getting on my nerves. She was on, when she answered the phone, she was crying because she had actually, and she's a young black woman. She had actually seen it. And not only did she see the main post, but she saw another comment of the person's family member who was saying how oh, well, this is all that Black people are going to say, and they're going to try to make it this way and blah, blah, blah. I didn't go through and read it because I was already disgusted with the main post. I just put my little 2 cents in and, that. But my girlfriend, she was crying and she was like, I'm so upset because she has a brother who is a very, sweet, gentle person. And her mother had to talk to her brother about, just the severity of it. Because this man, George Floyd, this grown man, was calling out for his mother with his final breaths. I mean, that is just, the weight of that is just crazy. So I would say that that's the most recent encounter I've had. One, going back a little further, was this is when I really realized how me as an ally, I have some privilege, I guess, power in my privilege. I was working for a family who was Black. I was doing like a nanny assistant position, and the mother, the 2 children, and her brother actually helped with the kids as well. So we went up to Grand Haven, and if nobody knows where it's predominantly white. So we were up there, and that was, I guess, their stomping grounds back in the day. The woman that I work for and her brother. So anyway, she's in like one of the taverns or something, and I'm out with the children and her brother and her son end up getting into it. And he's like, the son is like 13, 14, and they're getting into it. And, there's a cop standing nearby, and this was around the same time. It was after Trayvon Martin. It was after another couple of police shooting Black men. And so in my head, what triggered was, there's a police officer nearby, and these are 2 Black men. They don't care that this boy is like 13, 14 years old. He's tall enough to be like 16, 17. They're not going to be looking at him like a child, like how I see him, because I care for him. So I'm just seeing them like going at it, and so combating, and like I had to intervene with them to break them apart because they were like in each other's faces. And so I'd like break them apart and just let them know, like, guys, there is a police officer right over there, white cop, white police officer, like, we need to tone this down. We need to bring this down. Well, a few minutes after that, the uncle ends up getting mad at me for, I don't even remember exactly what it was, but he gets mad at me. And I'm just kind of like off to the side, just trying not to like get, emotional about it, because, you're basically yelling at me, and I'm just like trying to be cool. I'm trying to be real cool. And this white guy walks by, or he notices that, this Black man is yelling at me, and he's like trying to, are you okay? Are you good? And he's like trying to like, you know what I'm trying to, he's profiling this Black man. And for me, it's not a Black man yelling at me. It's, so-and-so, unmentioning his name, so-and-so yelling at me, and I'm about to go off on you if you don't stop. But there's police officers around and all these white people around. Like, I'm not trying to cause drama right now. So, I de-escalated it by just reassuring this white guy, like, everything's okay. Like, I'm fine. It's just a little kerfuffle. Like, it's all good. Are you sure? I'm cool. I'm good. Everything's all right. Okay. And he's like staring at this, like at the guy yelling at me. He's like staring at him as he walks away. So in that moment, all that to say, in that moment, I realized, as someone, as a white person, the kind of, I don't want to say power, but I guess privilege that I have in situations like this. Like, I can, and, it goes to that whole freaking Karen in the Parks incident where she wants to, call the cops on somebody who's telling her about herself and her dog, like, just because he's Black. Like, I have the power to not let things escalate into a way where another Black man could die.
Okay. Whew. All right. That was heavy. I don't know about my story. So I've been working in institutions of higher education for a very long time, and I had a very racist incident that happened, and I just had to deal with it. So I'm in a meeting, and I held a senior leadership role, and there was a woman who she's done all types of racist stuff. This state is just it just is what it is. And my job was in the backwoods somewhere. So we had a diversity conversation, and this particular woman decided to attack me for my experiences as a Black woman. And then she decided that she wanted to attack the only other person of color, which was a Black homosexual male, and wanted to attack us about our experiences as Black folks. And essentially what she didn't understand, because she couldn't wrap her mind around a lot of things, is that she had just realized that she had white privilege, and she just projected all of her feelings on us. So what I did was, in this meeting, my supervisor, who was a cisgender heterosexual male, he looked about as pale as it can come, because he didn't know. He looking at me like, Shetina from Detroit, I don't know how this is about to go. And I looked at him and I just said to him, we gonna do this, and we doing this today. So I essentially allowed this lady to have her voice. And then I chose, as the good Michelle Obama says, I chose the high road, because she went about as low as she could go. And I defended this brother who was a very good colleague. And then I also defended myself. And that person still doesn't understand that she's a racist, because she does things that is completely out of pocket. And she does it in a way in which it's a lot like she's just ignorant, and she's going to stay ignorant. So for me, in that moment, I utilized my voice in a way that I didn't think I would ever have to do, because hey, I'm educated, right? That's supposed to mean something at some point, right? It actually doesn't when you're a minoritized person. Other ways that I've had to honestly stop racism is the Black males that are on campus. There's this thing called Black Tax and Black Debt, and this where we have to hold each other down. And when I see, because oftentimes other colleagues respect me on campus, I have to use my voice. So if I see a Black man pulled over, especially because 9 out of 10 I know them, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna interject. Or if I'm reporting to something and something I know isn't right, I'm gonna pull that officer aside, because I've already developed this level of respect and relationship to have a meaningful conversation that is very educational. Oftentimes it always kind of worked out this way. The Black fraternities, their events were always extra policed. Their events always had 30 to 40 officers when it was only like 10 people in the party, which I get safety and security, but I know that when my white sisters and brothers, their events aren't even policed and they have more alcohol than I've ever seen. That there's a different kind of conversation as a professional that you need to have in order to help folks understand how this incident is very biased and racist. So yeah.
Yeah, wow, thank you. I know when we were on campus, we fought that when we were on campus, because there were events that Panhandle would do, and you know, that didn't have any police. There were thousands of people there, but we wanted to have a McKinney Union party, and we had to, you know, have all these police. So that was definitely something that we talked about. So I think that first I want to thank everyone for everything that they provided. We have 3 audience viewers questions. I think we can get to at least 2 of them. So the first question that I want to get to is how can white people advocate in a way that doesn't sound condescending? Anyone want to take that question?
Can I start?
Go ahead. I'll go after you.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So, you know, I've been speaking about this allyship, and this is like the 100 question. You know, everybody's been asking this hot question as our fellow white advocates or allies, if you will. So the 4 things that I can think of is, number 1 is reach out, right? Genuinely reach out. If it's, don't ask any other question, but how can I help you? Or what can I do right now for you individually, and then also as the community, for the community, and take whatever that is at face value. Okay, that's number 1. Reach out. Number 2, educate yourself. Do not always put the burden back on the person that's a part of the marginalized population. right? We tell the stories, we're teaching, we're always teaching. Help us out there, carry the load, be able to educate yourself, but not only educate yourself, step in and educate your peers, because they're going to be looking for you. And believe me, they know who already, quote unquote, is an ally to a specific population. I don't care if it's the Black population, I don't care if it's the LGBTQ population, whatever, they know who to go to, okay? And take that as an honor, but go ahead and do the education yourself. Number 3, listen. We've talked about this already. Just be a listening post. Sometimes people don't want to hear your opinions and what you have to say, but they rather just want you to be that present mind and listen, right? And then the last one is stand up. And when I say stand up, I mean in a different way, right? My stand up is, build your networks so that your networks can come as a unit and a united force of allyship, right? Build your networks. And then this word we use for everything else, but folks haven't been using this for the word ally. Bystander intervention. We talk about that all the time. What is your role as an ally? You have to have a clear understanding of what bystander intervention means. And that, again, that doesn't mean that every time something happens, you have to stand in my gap or talk on my behalf. But, character is what you do when no one else is looking. And so you being that, really being that bystander that can intervene, do so when you can, especially when it's a part of using your privilege, right? And in your spaces. And again, that's my 4 things, right? Reach out, educate, listen, stand up. I think those are some things that'll get you on your way to being a productive ally, right? That's what we want.
I'll add on to that with the reaching out piece, because a lot of people have said this. If you ain't reached out until now, I need you to own and recognize that you haven't reached out, because people notice, right? So if folks have just kind of been already operating in the land of condescending people, then it's going to look real suspect when you just be like, hey girl, how you doing? How you doing about George Floyd death? People are going to think that's disingenuous, right? So really coming from a space of like owning it, because unfortunately, the lived experiences of minoritized people, especially Black folks, is deep. And most of us have been we have been taught as quickly as we could walk and talk how you are supposed to be when you get stopped by the police. Mm-hmm. If somebody asks you a question, this is where you live, this is your number. So this lived experience goes real deep. So this, for us, this ain't just happened, honestly, in the last 10 years. Some of us have been doing this as long as we've been in grammar school. So understanding and recognizing the work that it takes to do this, and recognizing that, number one, you don't have all of the answers which you want to learn, and recognizing spaces which you didn't show up, and you didn't show up for us, because again, it seems very disingenuous. I also would say, just be willing to have a conversation. And I want to highlight this piece about listening. And I'm about to make somebody feel uncomfortable here, because it's okay, because I know them. Keith Paul Jason, to be 100% honest, like everything that he said, he's one of those people who I feel like has been an amazing ally, but has done it right. I feel so old right now. I feel like I've known Keith at least 16 years. I feel like I met him in 04, maybe 04. Definitely one of those times, but like when sometimes you've got to come, and you got to come honest, and you just got to say the hard truths. And Keith has been one of those people that literally will check his privilege and check himself at the door before you can check him. And we need more Keith Paul Jasons in the world, because you've got to be able to understand what you're dealing with from and understanding the space that you're operating from. So it's very important to understand that. And honestly, I'm going to say it just because I have a brother. When you dealing with a Black man, it's a whole nother type of conversation that you have to have. So when you're talking about how you talk to a Black man, you got to show that man some respect, right? And I mean, you should show that with any minoritized individual, but you got to come correct. And the most importantly, be open and honest, and be willing to hear that, brother, because I'm going to tell you, all of the stuff that's going on in this country, this is not new to them. And the fear is real for Black men, because again, they think Black women are soft targets, which I don't think we are, but at the same, because they are now attacking Black women. But I think that it's important to know that Black men have been targeted, and they've been socialized to understand that they're targets, because it's a thing for us. And this is not just mystics and fairy tales. And that's it.
Even us with PhDs, EDDs, medical degrees, we still walk in a space where we realize that every morning when we wake up, we're Black male, period.
And our degrees won't save us.
No.
And I have to say that, because
they don't see that.
You don't see that. When I get pulled over, I'm just a bald woman who may or may have earrings on. They may or may not think I'm a man, but at the end of the day, I'm still a Black woman, and that's what people see. And that's the unfortunate and fortunate piece.
Thanks for that question, whoever asked that question. Thank you. That was a good question.
Yeah. Anyone else?
So I just want to say thank you to Shetina for your words. I appreciate you. I'm not going to say that I disagree with you, but I will say that I think that I am where I am today because several Black people have been patient with me. And I think that's important to acknowledge. I've said some dumb things in my life, like some really dumb things in my life. I've come from, angles and perspectives on things that just, I had to be sat down. Like, yo, do you not understand what you just said? And, I had to listen and had to take it on the chin. So I've learned to do that. This may sound condescending and answering a question about not being condescending, but just don't be condescending. Like that, like let's just start there, right? And then remember that you cannot withdraw from an account that you have not deposited into. If you have not been present, if you have not invested, if you have not taken the time out to build a relationship, then there's certain things that you just cannot expect to accomplish. The last thing that I want to say is that earlier I talked about the idea of knowing enough to be dangerous. And there's a lot of things that a lot of us are learning nowadays, and a lot of white people are learning nowadays. And while it's very tempting to run off and just try to go play the savior, try to go be the hero, like recognize again that if you haven't deposited into that account, you can't make a withdrawal. And at the same time, you may be very well intended, but very well intended doesn't always get you a very good outcome. And so just recognize that you can mean well and actually end up doing harm. So I think it's just important to really check yourself before you show up to speak. And I haven't always done a good job of doing that. And I'm still learning. So thank y'all for being patient with me.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Sorry, I had a praise break there.
Right. Anyone else before you go to the last question? Okay. I just want to say thank you, brother, for sharing that. That is it needed to be said. It was powerful and just necessary. One of the things Dr. Hammonds mentioned the book 35 Dumb Things Well-Intended People Say. And one of them is, if I can remember it exactly, but I'm going to try to go for it. But one of them is, I know exactly how you feel. The same thing happened to me. How, if you're not Black or Latina, like, how did that same thing happen to you? Like, how? So I think that's important. Keith, you were about to say something?
But just don't draw false equivalencies.
Right.
Right. So like, I understand what it's like. This is the false equivalency. This is not me saying this. I understand what it's like to be Black because I grew up poor. Like, just things that you just don't want to say, but things that you hear people say on a regular basis.
You're right. But guess what? I grew up poor too, and I'm not poor now. And I will tell you, I'm still treated like a Black man when I was poor and when I'm not. So it's not the same thing, people. It's not. So let's go to one last question. Thank you very much, Keith, for that clarity. The next question is, how can we advocate to have Black voices heard in a room where they're underrepresented while not tokenizing them? Kat, you want to go? Hannah? I forget the order now. Sorry.
This makes me a little uncomfortable to go on this one. So my only perspective here to offer is to say that person must be acknowledged and compensated. So if you are growing because of a Black person sharing their experience, they're providing you something, and there has to be a level of compensation there. And so acknowledging that, compensating that in some way, it is not my right to grow just by listening to you talk about your experience and trying to empathize with that or learn. That's not how that relationship works. And we just have to find a better way to acknowledge that. And to the person that asked that question, I really appreciate it, because he's heard me ask that question before. He's heard me ask that question, I think, through Dr. Akbar, that is something we've got to work on in a shared situation. And so I'm really interested to hear kind of the other perspectives on that as well.
Absolutely. So let me tell you, the first thing is the reason why tokenism exists is because we may need to do a little bit more work in our attracting, recruiting talent, diverse talent, right? So that's number one. Some of these spaces are very homogeneous because we don't want to do the work to ensure that we have diverse spaces, right? So that's number one. You should do your best to create and leverage who you have and leverage diverse opportunities for your workforce to be diverse. However, you haven't arrived there yet. I get it. And so what I think you should do most definitely is have a conversation. You know how you always have meetings before the meetings anyway? Well, have a conversation with that person who represents that population to see if they're even comfortable, right? To see if they're even comfortable with being the quote unquote spokesperson for that marginalized population. And I don't care who that is. Oftentimes there is one Black person in the space, and sometimes that Black person, fortunately, I'll say, may have several layers of intersectionality, and then now you just ask them to be the spokesperson every time for all of those marginalized populations. Be careful, because that generally falls back on you as the leader, because you haven't provided those spaces to be that diverse. And so again, have that conversation beforehand, and then do not make it a best practice that every time we need to hear the voice of that population, you automatically go to that individual, because that is disingenuous. You're not being able to do the work. So that's not allyhood. Oh, there's an old school YouTube video, whoever asked this question, that I want you to go and watch. It's just type in diversity, X's and O's. Diversity, X's and O's. And it's going to really break down this question that you just asked, and it's going to give you an old school answer to that question. Diversity, X's and O's. Thank you for the question.
So in 2002, I was a leadership at Eastern Michigan University, and Judy Sturgis Hill pulled me to the side, and in a way that only Judy Sturgis Hill could, got me together really quickly in the moment, but was a lesson that I've continued to learn moving forward from that time. She simply said to me, "Do you know that you don't always have to be the first person to speak up?" And I was like, but, and you know, in the moment, I didn't want to hear it. But I've learned moving forward that being, especially in the line of work that I do, right? Like, there's not a lot of white guys who are in the line of work that I do. Right now, I work for the Comprehensive Studies program at the University of Michigan. I'm the only white male on staff who's not teaching. So I just think that it's very important to make sure that you acknowledge the space that needs to be present for everyone else in the room to be heard. And so NJ is messing with me right now about how normally I talk a lot more. And that's because he knows me from 2005, 2006, 2007. But Keith at 2002, okay, 2002. So you're older than I thought you were. But so the Keith at 39 doesn't have as much of a need to hear himself speak as he did at 19 through 25. Because I get to announce sports now and I hear myself on the microphone all the time. So I don't need to hear all the rest of the stuff. But it's important to acknowledge the space for other people to be able to have that. But how do you do it without tokenizing? I think that you have to help people understand that the idea that this person is here because they're a token says something to your mentality and says something to the way that you're thinking about this a lot of times. Now, I'm not genuinely putting somebody up there because they're Black. I understand that it happens. But if you're white and you're looking in the audience and thinking, oh, well, they're just up there because they're Black, like, let's not dismiss people's qualifications like that.
Hanna, do you have anything?
I don't. I'm taking in what everybody's saying. I'm learning too.
All right, thank you.
So I would say, just to not repeat what everyone else is saying, it's interesting that everybody wants Black people voices, and when they start to speak, you don't actually listen. One of the things that is oftentimes a thing, especially for Black women, is we may talk, nobody hears it, and our white colleague may say something, and then it's a good idea. And that happens more commonly than people think, because a lot of times some of us are in meetings and we doodling. Let's be honest, we're not paying attention. But that's a part of that tokenization piece, right? Where you just want my presence, but you don't want my mind. And that's about as disrespectful as any other things that we're talking about, right? So when you have Black folks who are in the room, actually listen to what they're saying, actually invite them in their whole authentic selves. Another piece of tokenization is this piece of like, oh, there's a Black person. They may or may not dress like this. They may or may not, or their hair looks different. Let's have a conversation about these things. Let's not do that. Because that's a part of that. Like, you haven't done your work, and we don't want you to not do your work. Okay. So really being able to allow Black folks to show up in the space as their whole authentic space, their whole authentic selves, and you not to think that they're a unicorn because one day I have a wig on, another day I don't have on a wig. So recognizing who's in the space and really truly allow them to be themselves. And going back to what Dr. Hammond said, is this idea of understanding all of their intersections. So let's move away from this is a cool Black girl. Oh, but that might be the cool trans Black woman. So really being able to understand who's sitting at the table. And if you're in a position to invite more people to the table, invite more Black people. Understand, why is there only one Black person working for your entire company or your entire department? I can promise you there are more qualified folks out there who are like us. And if this is a term of higher education, you don't fit. You're not a good fit. Fit is about as disrespectful as calling somebody the B word, especially for Black folks, because we understand and interpret this terminology of what fit is and what fit is not. So recognizing who is showing up and allowing other people to come into the space. Because again, folks like our culture, but don't like who we are as individuals. So let's break that down and really truly advocate in that way and understand and recognize where are all the Black folks and why do we only have to hire one every 6 months? So recognizing those things.
Yeah, that is actually so good. I really wish we could continue this conversation, but we
1
are
second.
time. 1 second.
1 second, Don Lemon. 1 second.
I've never known you to do anything in 1 second. But go ahead.
I know. Real quick, she hit so much good stuff. So why do all the Black kids sit together in the cafeteria? Write that book down. Get that book down, because oftentimes we're too busy worried about the Black kids. We're not talking about the other multi-comparable people that are in the space. So that's another resource that you all can go and look at. And then the last thing I was going to say is Daryl Sue talks a lot about Chester Pierce microaggressions, right? But the Chester came up with those first in 1970s, a Black man. But Daryl Sue does the work, right? And he talks about micro assault, micro insult, micro invalidation. And we got to be careful when we're starting to micro invalidate folks, because what happens is we take away from their experiences and who they are. Their experiences and who they are. Don't ask us for the questions and ask us to do the hard work and then micro invalidate what they just said. Also, when that person says, because of my race, I believe that you did X, Y, and Z, be careful again not to micro invalidate them, because by saying something like, well, you're using the race card. So you can't eat your cake and have your cake and eat it at the same time. You have to figure out what's advantageous for the equity of your organization. If not, then what you're doing is, again, back to that disingenuous and back to what we've all been talking about today, the inequalities of the Black male. Thank you for that 1 second, Don Lemon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the 95 seconds that you used, but I think it was very helpful. Thank you. No, but seriously, thank you everyone for participating. If I could just end with just this comment, because we've actually well extended our time. This has been a great conversation, though. I just want to say, if you want to advocate for Black people in a room where there's not that many, you can begin to advocate for Black people by making sure that more are in the room. The other piece is when you're in the room, before you start talking about race, before there's a comment about something that happened that you want a Black perspective on, when you're talking about an issue that doesn't necessarily have to do with race, you should be making sure that that Black voice is heard. And so if you're not hearing their voice, to ask, what are your thoughts on this? If you see that their voices have been minimized or ignored, to say, you know what, I agree with what Shetina said. I agree with what she said, and then repeat what she said. Because what happens is they definitely do devalue our voices sometimes. And I just want to say that I'm so appreciative of everyone joining us today. And I'll tell you one quick thing. There's some things about race and how we address these topics that I've been talking about for years. And yet, it wasn't until I actually had my degree conferred that some people thought it was okay to start inviting me to the conversation. But I'm not saying anything different than I said 5 years ago, right? So I just have a degree now, and so I guess you think that what I'm saying is valid. And also, please don't tell somebody, especially a Black person, that they're so articulate. That is one of the most I hate that to my core. And it's like, so am I supposed to be anything other than articulate? That's just ridiculous. So Kat, Hanna, Dr. Jones, Dr. Mark, Hammonds, and Keith, thank you very much for joining us. We definitely appreciate you with this conversation on allies for this 10-part series on race and racism, perspectives with Black men, our voices, our experiences, our solutions. And just with that, when we talk about solutions, we will be back next week on Sunday. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. We'll be back this week on Wednesday, July 1st. Thank you, Kat, for catching me. Thank you. July 1st, we'll be here Wednesday, July 1st, for our 10th episode of this 10-part series, talking about solutions and racism with one member of each one of the 9 panels that we had previously to talk about solutions and innovations and where do we go from here. We've had the conversation. We had conversations with different types of individuals, and we've heard different perspectives. Now let's talk about what's next. And so we will be happy to have on that panel Tyrell Boyston, who was in episode 5, Daniel Mahoney, who was episode 3, Corey Anderson from episode 1, Dr. Kalanji Walton from episode 8, Cornelius Porter from episode 7, Kwabena Shelton from episode 6, and Imokai Okolu from episode 2, and Victor Walker from episode 4. And one of these lovely individuals, after we get off, I will find out which one of them will be joining us on Wednesday, July 1st, where we will talk about solutions and innovations and what's next. So please be kind to people. As I tell people, one of my favorite social media personalities right now is Tabitha Brown. And so I tell people that please have a great day, have a great evening. But if you're not, please don't go up and mess up somebody else's day. So with that being said, thank you very much and have a great evening.